We are talking Scarecrow's Revenge. This is also known as Scarecrow versus Vikings. And this one is directed by Louisa Warren, who also has a small role in the movie. And Louisa Warren's actually done a number of kind of lower budget Scarecrow related movies that I actually reviewed on the channel. And she also done a movie called Pagan Warrior, which was originally known as Krampus versus Vikings, which is, to be honest with you, strikingly similar to this movie, and even has some of the kind of the same cast, and I'm assuming probably crew behind it as well. Anyway, we are now talking about Scarecrow's Revenge. So the Scarecrow has been a staple of kind of many a horror movie or kind of TV show throughout the years, and it pops up every so often, and you know, it's a pretty good kind of character or archetype to have scary movies based on. And I'm actually quite a big fan. One of my favourite movies was a movie simply called Scarecrows from the mid-80s, which was genuinely creepy despite being a relatively low-budget B-movie. So here with Scarecrow's Revenge, we have a kind of genre-mashing style title, which actually Louisa Warren has done before, as I've mentioned, with the kind of Krampus versus Vikings. So we have a kind of slasher Scarecrow movie, but this one is set in the 9th century with kind of Viking settlers in the kind of in the UK. So it focuses on this kind of this small village or tribe of kind of Viking settlers, and they kind of, there's a guy who is a kind of a rapist who they sort of essentially kind of kick out the village, for lack of a better word. They kind of like dismiss him, so to speak, and he's going to go off, and they tie him to this scarecrow initially, and he kind of escapes and wants revenge. So he goes to this kind of like this witch who kind of lives in the woods, who ultimately gives him this supernatural power in exchange for his soul, and he comes back as this kind of this scarecrow who goes around and kind of, you know, kills practically anyone who comes from that village. And it's up to the kind of the leader of the village and his daughter to really try and find a way to maybe overcome this kind of scarecrow and obviously save their people. So what do we think of Scarecrow's Revenge? So a very low budget movie, so this is definitely falls into the kind of the B movie category, but I do like a high concept idea, and I do like the idea of kind of mashing fantasy movies and kind of horror movies. That has been done before, but I feel it's kind of like an interesting take, and having two, you know, like Viking is very popular because of the TV show, and like I said, Scarecrows are always relatively popular. They're always kind of like, they're not quite as up there with vampires and kind of zombies maybe, but they are nonetheless a decent kind of horror bad guy, so to speak, and can be pretty scary. So I do kind of quite like the idea here of having these kind of these two genres kind of meet. And one of the critiques that I had from Louisa Warren's earlier Scarecrow movies is that the Scarecrow itself doesn't look particularly scary, but I feel that they have evolved the look of the Scarecrow somewhat in this one to give it more of a kind of a scary face, completely kind of like seemingly having teeth and stuff like that. And it being kind of in obviously a period piece, obviously, 1,000 or so years ago, there's no mobile phone, there's no medieval technology, and obviously everyone here pretty much believes in gods and supernatural stuff and things like that, which adds this kind of dynamic to it that you don't get necessarily in modern horror films, because obviously people are, a lot more kind of evolved and civilized now, which back then, obviously, they're going to kind of not have the resources and things like that. Albeit, there's a suspiciously looking modern axe among other props that look a little bit too modern for the time period. But hey, like I've said, it's a low-budget B movie. And there is a relatively high body count in this film, albeit a relatively kind of bloodless one, which I was fairly surprised about. But nonetheless, there is a kind of the Scarecrow cuts a swathe through many a villager within this movie, and uses his kind of scythe as his kind of like main weapon, which I guess is probably apt for a Scarecrow villain. Maybe what doesn't work with this one, the film is just very, very low budget, and obviously this is going to certainly put off a great many people. But if you can kind of look past the low budget stuff and look at it as a kind of straight to video movie, which, let's be honest, is kind of what we review here, then should you still watch it from there? Even with that in mind, I feel the budget here is noticeably low. things like the kind of the Viking village looks very kind of like sparse and things like that, extras, things like this, all looks kind of very kind of like, you know, sparse and very kind of, as I've mentioned, kind of low budget. So that in mind, I feel the acting, unfortunately, is a little bit of a case of overacting by some of the actors here. There's really kind of quite lots of very inexperienced, I feel, actors on this movie. Some fare a little better than others, but some really kind of overact. Our kind of our bad guy, so to speak, who I have seen in other films, who I feel was better in other films. It kind of like does this kind of weird vocal kind of hissing thing that he does, and it's just terrible, to be quite honest with you. But some of the other performances are a little bit wooden, shall we say. The movie, I've got to say, is a little light on plots, perhaps. There is an attempt here to have a kind of a twist with lineage, which I did appreciate, I must say. But nonetheless, it's more or less the kind of a scarecrow stalking various victims through the woods. And obviously we know that our only kind of characters that matter are the kind of the chieftain leader and his daughter, really. And anyone else is pretty much cannon fodder. So therefore, because of its relatively kind of simplistic plot, it doesn't really kind of make it an enthralling movie. And the movie as well, and this is one of the critiques I had with the very similar Krampus versus Vikings, aka Pagan Warrior. A lot of it is filmed during the day, and because of that, it lends itself to not a particularly scary kind of feeling. Now, I'll refer back to the 80s Scarecrow movie, simply called Scarecrows, and that had really creepy vibes, because you just had this kind of sea of corn and the kind of the wind, you know, go through it of a night, and it was genuinely creepy. The kind of the scarecrows kind of swaying back and forth. Great stuff, great visuals, and really kind of give you a kind of sense of dread without really doing any type of kind of, you know, grandiose kind of special effects and things. And maybe the kind of this sort of subtlety would have been a little bit more appreciated in this one. There's also an intro of this movie that I didn't feel made sense in context of the rest of the film. We have a couple of characters come across our Scarecrow early on, but in the context of the film, it doesn't make sense, because we see the Scarecrow at its creation and right through to the end of the movie, and then but it has these kind of other characters with some shipping and who had nothing to do with the plot. I don't know. I don't really know what was going on there. So there's kind of a few kind of plot holes with this movie. So I've got to say it's very much like the kind of the other movies from Louisa Ward in regards to the kind of the Pagan Warrior, that sort of thing. Very similar concept, really. Very similar. You know, plot really as well. The Krampus creature and the Pagan Warrior looks very impressive, a little bit more so than the kind of the Scarecrow in this one, I feel. And one of the things I liked about that movie and the things I disliked is very similar to this one. I do feel it's maybe a little bit of a step up from the earlier Scarecrow movies, however. So I'll give this one I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.